Broadcasting from our New England studio, Solutions Review is proud to showcase PCG and Infor in the Solution Spotlight, an inside look at enterprise technologies.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to the Solution Spotlight featuring PCG and focused on upcoming changes to the U.S. Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification. I'm going to hand this event over to Christina Reynolds, Managing Director of Industry Specialty Services at BDO, to walk you through what's changing for onboarding approved vendors, how CMMC affects teaming and joint ventures, and what subcontractors need to know to stay competitive. Christina, over to you.
Great. Good to be with you all today. I'm Christina Reynolds. I'm the Managing Director for BDO USA's Industry Specialty Services. I always say that's a fancy name for everything that's government contracting, state and local, nonprofit, and everything above and below that. So we help support industry, especially the defense industrial base, and my team is focused on cybersecurity certifications, including CMMC and other certifications that we help support the defense industrial base to achieve in order to bid and win their government contracts.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Kapp, VP of the A&D practice at PCG. PCG is a services partner to Infor. PCG is a de facto services provider for all GovCloud related work in this space.
Hi, I'm Alex Plitas, the Vice President for Transformation at Infor. I've been in the ecosystem about 10 years or so, working with Dan and Christina and other colleagues across the A&D spectrum to help bring these solutions to companies in the industry and to help transform the businesses and help you grow. This is an incredible opportunity to hear from Christina, who is really the subject matter expert in the ecosystem on where we're headed with CMMC, particularly as Infor has several CMMC offerings that are has several software offerings that are CMMC ready. And there's going to be a big regulatory push that's going to be published very shortly that she's going to get into. So we're excited to be here to talk to you about that today.
So I think we wanted to start off with some questions. Alex, do you want to kind of go through, and I certainly talked to you about a lot of the questions that I receive in industry day to day. We have a full list of things to go through. These are some of the most common questions that I hear from my clients when they come to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think that's a great point. So CMMC, right? That is the acronym governing the cybersecurity regulations that you're going to get into that are going to apply here. But they're based upon whether or not a company has CUI present or they generate it or whatnot. But folks don't understand the acronyms. What is CUI?
So CUI, we're gonna kind of kick this off because this is probably the most common question I get every day. I have a lot of clients that come to me that say, I have this clause in my contract, DFARS 252-204-7012, and it says I should be getting CUI from the government. I haven't seen it. I don't know where it is. I don't know what it is. So first and foremost, in the original 32 CFR that was issued for controlled unclassified information, we really started off to present a set of regulations that protected what's called controlled unclassified information. Now, a lot of people get this confused with classified because this word classified appears in it, but it's actually unclassified information. But it's unclassified information that the government considers sensitive. We want you to keep it controlled. And largely, when we say the word controlled, this is speaking to its confidentiality. So the government may give you information that while it is not classified, the government says it is your obligation when this information hits your system to ensure that you are protecting the confidentiality of this sensitive but unclassified information in a very controlled manner. Now, how do you define controlled? Well, we'll go on to define how the government defines that with some very strict best practices as regulated by NIST. However, when they presented controlled unclassified information, there's a few things I want to point out here. Number one, they define this as information that either the government creates or possesses, and here's the important thing, there's a two-pronged fork to this, that an entity creates or possesses on behalf of the government. Because there's a two-pronged fork here, it's very easy to note when the government gives you CUI, because guess what? They're going to mark it. You're going to see a header, you're going to see a footer, you're going to see a cover page, and it will say controlled unclassified information, or it may have the notation of CUI. And that's what the government's saying, this is the information that you need to protect. However, the entity could be generating it. Now, largely, this is generating something that might have derivative CUI. So the government gave you CUI. Maybe it's a schematic, maybe it's a design spec. It could be a number of things, but we're typically with CUI dealing with the documentation surrounding the design of something. When they give that to you, I'll give you an example. One of my clients is a large-scale crane manufacturer. Typically, their products are commercial items in nature. However, for one contract, the government says, put an armor plating on this. In putting an armor plating on it, whatever documentation was attached or documenting that armor plating, even if it was put in their assembly instructions, which were not previously CUI, the government said, because you have that design of the armor plating in aggregate in that document, everything in that document becomes CUI, because that's the way the government works. If we stick a higher piece of information in, we have to treat everything in that document, in that design spec, to that highest level, right? So this is what that means. When there could be a two-pronged fork, keep in mind, it could be things that you are generating. Now, I always say it's important to design what it is and define that, and also define what it is not. And so they go on to say it doesn't include classified information, but more importantly, it does not include information that a non-executive branch entity possesses or maintains on its own systems that did not come from or was not created or possessed by or for an executive branch agency or an entity acting for an agency. So this is where a lot of confusion happens, because we do see contracts that are marked as CUI, or even when the government asks you for that SF 1408, that approved accounting system, they're pre-marking that blank form as CUI. So the real question is here is, why is the government doing this? In essence, what we have to keep in mind is that the government is trying to protect your information as much as theirs. And this is the marking they are effectively using to do that. So keep in mind, when the information isn't actually government information, but the government may still apply some marking protections to your information to safeguard it as if it were their own, and to treat it as sensitive. One more chart here I want to show you, and this is when we look at the definition, I've attached one particular category in the CUI category to show you how different categories can really pull a lot of information out. When we look at DFARS 7012, there are some very specific directions that we take with CUI. We know there's an exemption for COTS. That's actually an exemption issued even as far down as the FCI or federal contract information level. So COTS are generally exempted from this. There is a mandatory flow down for DFARS 7012, but what I want you to concentrate on, I've included an example CUI category here that a lot of defense contractors handle. That is controlled technical information. So this is under the Defense Organizational Grouping Index underneath the CUI categories, and you can find those on the National Archives NARA's website. If you just type in NARA and CUI, you're going to go straight there. So this is one category we see a lot, especially with military and space applications, right? So there's a definition of technical data, and the minute that the government considers it controlled, it's because it applies to DoD military and space applications. But look at the list on the right. It can include research and engineering data, engineering drawings, associated lists, specifications, standards, process sheets, manuals, technical reports, technical orders, catalog item identifications, data sets, studies and analyses, and related information. And it can include software executable code and source code. So this shows you how specific subcategories of CUI have a long list of this is what classifies, but it's information that is provided to you or you're generating for the government that has a military and space application. So I know that was a long way around, but we got there.
That's great information, Christina. I was on site at an aerospace defense company yesterday in Phoenix. They're considering a journey to migrating from on-premise ERP to a GovCloud solution from Infor. And they asked me, how do we know for sure whether or not we need CMMC compliance? Is there somewhere they can go to kind of check that box and have a yes or no? What's the process for that?
Certainly. And let me show you a list of the government, is very thorough when they put these clauses in your contract. And I want to talk about when it's going to apply to you, when you may have some foreknowledge of receiving CUI. First and foremost, if you look on the right under the Department of Defense, if they are receiving DFARS 252, 204, 7012, here's the important distinguisher I want them to take away from this is that the minute that is in your contract, it may not necessarily mean you're receiving CUI right now, but what it does indicate is the government may intend to send you that in the future. What they're asking you to do is the implementation side. So I'm going to differentiate between 7012 and 7021 by saying one cares about how you implement the NIST 800-171 controls. That's DFARS 7012. Why are they telling you to do that? Because they want you to have an environment to store and safely either transmit, store, process CUI in when you receive it, or if you are generating it, you have this secure. Now, they don't say this has to be your entire enterprise. They don't tell you how to implement this. This is something that each company has to decide for themselves. The other side of this, thou shalt implement, there's not much teeth in 7012 to say you have to have a perfect score. It says you have to submit a summary level score to the government when you are, usually bidding a contract. It's tied to the 7019 that says, tell us the score you have. If you're a prime, you'll get 7019. If you're a subcontractor, you'll get 7020 as a flow down. It says essentially the same thing in a very bottom part of that clause. If you're a subcontractor, report your score to SPRS. The other side of this, do I have CUI? You're in the future, starting November 10th, you're going to see this DFARS 7021 clause. And this is the teeth of the other side. You have implementation 7012. The teeth are, now you have to prove to us. We will no longer take your word for it from a self-attestation perspective. You need to go find a certified third-party assessment or organization. They will certify you. And two-pronged things will say, we likely are going to send you CUI. You likely may generate CUI. Please have a place to put that, even if you are not right now.
That's great information. So thanks for sharing that. The other confusing part they had yesterday was when. What's the timing for this? They understand the mandate is coming. They were well aware of that. But what is the timing for compliancy? Maybe you can share a bit on that.
Sure. Yeah. And I've got a few slides to show you here. So number one, to take you on that journey I just told you about, this box on the far left, this was published back in 2013. The deadline within that clause to implement NIST 800-171 is already hard-coded in this clause. It says, thou shalt be implementing NIST 800-171 by December 31st, 2017. When you sign that contract, you are attesting that you have done that, or you are in progress and you are submitting a summary level score. What happened effectively last year, there's two parts to the CMMC. The first part is they had to authorize the ecosystem to exist and function on their own. And they also had to set up the rules for how assessments would be done. There's a lot of confusion out there when they released the 32 CFR. It went active when it reached final rule stage, December 16th, 2024, at the end of last year. This didn't put anything into your contract. This did nothing to your contract. All it did was say people like BDO, who are RPOs, registered practitioner organizations, people who are third-party assessment organizations, they are authorized without the government babysitting them to independently conduct assessments. And it said this is how they will conduct them. And it sets up all the rules and regulations for our ecosystem to function independently from the government. The 48 CFR is everything that's happened since then. So the government needed teeth to ensure that there was a condition of award tied to this certification. So that's what 7021 does. 7021 says CMMC certification will now be a condition of award. This was published September 10th into the final rule state. It goes active, and there was actually a recent class deviation a couple of months ago to say contract officers do not jump ahead of this date, November 10th, 2025. Do not start issuing 2021 or 7021 into contracts until the active date applies. Once this active date, November 10th, applies, contractors will see it, number one, in new contracts they go to bid. Number two, in new option years. They will not see it in mods or amendments or anything like that because this is a condition of award. If they've already awarded you the contract, they can't make this a condition of award. So new contracts and new option years.
So thanks for that information as well, Alex. Sorry, I'm taking over the question on this, but to finalize, what's the penalty if they don't adhere? Like you've been a defense contractor for years and years. You have adhered to the policy, but with the new mandate, what if you lapse? What happens? Talk through the penalty, I guess, a bit if you can.
So we're looking at, with the 7021 clause, the active date November 10th. It is a condition of award. And what's interesting about this is there's inside of 7021, there's an adjoining provision. So this provision, that was that last column I was showing you, is 7025. And effectively, this is where the penalties are. And they're not going to charge you a fee. There's not going to be penalties. There's going to be, you do not get the award. So 7025 is essentially the instruction to the contract officer to say, number one, when they issue the solicitation, the RFP, they have to say what level of CMMC they are going to require as a condition of award. And the second part of this is they need to hold them to that certification. If they do not meet it by the time of award, let's say you have your C3PAO assessment a week before award and you get it, you can qualify. It has to be at the time of award when they say, I need your certification in hand, or at least a conditional. You may have contract officers that will accept if you reach a conditional state, but you still have a few POAM items to close out. You're at that 80% met threshold and a C3PO is working with you. You may get some ability to say, we're at the conditional state, we have a conditional certification, and we'll close it all out within 180 days. I want to show you guys real quick the timeline here. So if we're looking at where we are, what people aren't realizing about this timeline, and I heard this, recently at the N4 conference, was, well, I've been told by our legal we have a year. And I said that is absolutely not true. So if we look at how this timeline is going to play out for contractors, there's going to be a 4-phase rollout. Now, while they allow you in phase 1 to self-attest, the whole game on SPRS for self-attestation has changed. There is a different tab. And if you're going to take away one thing from everything that I'm stating to you today, I want you to perk your ears up and really, really listen for what is going to happen when we talk about SPRS and posting this score. So number one, if you're a contractor that is looking to bid contracts and at least reach a self-attestation of CMMC level 2, there are 2 different tabs. Now, what people are used to posting when they go into the SPRS system, it will look like this. You will click on cyber reports. It will bring you to a place where you can make cyber reports. Now, if you look on the top line, you're going to see that there's a tab for NIST 800-171. Now, this is if you have DFARS 7012 in your contract. And this particular tab doesn't care what score you post. It lets you post anything. But as we are speaking to CMMC level 2, let's talk about the next tab over, which says CMMC assessments. This is a wholly different tab. And for the people who are sitting there, and your legal may be saying, we've got a year, or you have another organization that's saying, well, you have a year, you can just self-attest. It does not work the same way. When we hit this tab, and you click on the CMMC Level 2 Self tab, the same rules are going to apply to posting a score here as meeting with a C3PAO. How they have programmed this tab to function, you have to be at that same conditional certification level of 80% of the controls have to be met. You will have to check them off one at a time. So hear me and hear me now. False Claims Act will apply. They will keep this as a record, and it shows every single security control that you have said you have met. You have to individually mark them. If you do not reach the 80% threshold, or you have security controls that we have to score each security control differently, some are -5, some are -3, and some are -1. The way they score this is they give you a perfect 110, and you start subtracting for every security control you do not meet. Your maximum negative score is -203 by this scoring methodology. If you have even one -3 open or one -5 open, it grays out and disallows you the ability to submit. What does this mean on your contract? It means that if you think you have a year and you're below the 80% threshold, or you even have one -5 or -3 open, you will not be able to submit your self-attest score on CMMC Level 2, which means you will not win that bid.
Christina, just to make sure the audience is clear as they're listening here. So for phase 1, as you were talking about, right, it's 12 months. It begins November 10th, 2025, coming up shortly. It's the self-attestation period. You just walked everybody through the portal where they're going to have to go through if they have the clauses, and make sure that they're going to go ahead and register their scores right in there for their for the 110 controls that would come with Level 2. You've explained the grading criteria. Some of the common questions we get are, okay, if the contract solicitation came out prior to that date, but it hasn't been awarded, and say the award is going to come up in January, 2 months after this has come into effect, and it's got CMMC as a requirement in the contract award, do I have the full year to get this done, or by the time of award in January, do I have to get this done in order to be eligible to win the contract?
So the way that they've instructed the contract officers with that 7025 is they must announce via solicitation if the CMMC Level 2 is going to be in there and which version they are taking. So when I say which version, with this phased implementation, that top right-hand note that I make in some procurements, DoD basically can do whatever they want. If they want to say this year, I don't want you to just self-attest. I want you to walk in with a certification. And if you are a mission critical element or supporting a mission critical system, keep in mind, and especially the big guys we're talking about, our large primes, they're probably going to have this requirement in their contract sooner rather than later. And you see that each red DoD optional, they can implement the next phase whenever they want, but they have to tell you before you bid, right? So that when you see it in your contract, this is not going to be a surprise to you. They have told you that either they're going to let you in this first year, fill in that self-attest, or they're going to say, come with a certification in hand, because it will not be worth your time to continue to bid something you have no chance of winning.
Which makes sense. So we're talking new contracts post-September 10th, new solicitations that come out, November 10th. We'll be looking for the clauses that you just kind of went through for everybody that's in here. And you mentioned something I think that's important from a lot of the folks in the community and in the industrial base. It's not just the primes, as you mentioned, right? But if they've got subcontractors, or if they've got suppliers in the base that are, tier 2, tier 3 that are feeding them, should they expect to see these clauses flow down to them from the primes if these are in their contracts, and do these apply to them?
Absolutely. And the DoD has answered a lot of questions about this, as in what level of compliance am I flowing down to my subcontractors? Because guess what? And you've heard me say this before, DoD does not have privity of contract. That's why they put it on the prime shoulders. They don't know who your subcontractors are. They don't know who your vendors are. So they say to the primes effectively, we're going to make this a flow down clause. We see that a flow down clause for 7012, 7020, and 7021. And so when they get it in their contracts, they flow all of these down to you, but maybe not the same level of CMMC that they are obligated to. So for example, the DoD just recently issued a question and answer about, what about level 3? So if the primes are mandated to be level 3, does that mean all the subcontractors are? Because you know immediately that's going to be an issue. Not a lot
Correct.
of contractors are going to be able to be to level 2, let alone ever get to level 3, which adds an additional 24 controls for advanced persistent threats. The DoD said, no, not necessarily. Just because the prime may be required to be at a level 3, and understandably so, they are the most targeted, especially by, in the cybersecurity world, advanced persistent threats, those threats that hang around in your network for months, sometimes years. And when they get out, they're getting out with all your information, all your customers' information, maybe even a lot of CUI information. And we want to stop the bleeding, right? So they said when you pass down this level, it should be at minimum, if the primes are level 3, they will at minimum pass down a level 2 requirement. Those subcontractors not handling CUI must at minimum meet CMMC level 1.
Very good. And so the last question on that, for the folks that are listening who are in those tier 2 or tier 3 supplier categories or subcontractors to a prime, what should they be looking for in their current paperwork or future paperwork that would be different than the prime who's getting the solicitation?
Great question. And obviously, we're seeing a lot of different questionnaires being sent out. So first, let's understand, again, I go back to what are they flowing down to you? What are they required to flow down to you? So first and foremost, here's the 3 clauses, right? When they start to ask you questions, they are trying to answer these 3 clauses. So first one is, remember I said, implement, thou shalt implement. And I'll show you a quick picture on that because we want to think there's like 2 sides of this. One is implementation, one is certification. So I like to use this slide a lot to say DFARS 7012, the requirement for self-attestation, one for the prime, one for the subcontractor. Those are all about implementing the controls. And that might be a journey, right? When you start to get that 7021 passed down, it is you should have already made the journey. Everything on the left, you should have already done, whether you're a prime, whether you're a subcontractor. So when the prime is going to ask you, and they're going to flow down those questionnaires, they are asking you, number 1, have you implemented? So a lot of that is aligning to the requirements in DFARS 7012 to implement the full 110 controls. They may also ask you, if you haven't fully implemented, do you have a system security plan? And do you have a plan of actions and milestones for anything you have still not gotten to as a MET control? And you need to answer that honestly. Now, that does not mean you need to hand over your system security plan to your prime. Many times that contains a lot of confidential information on somebody's network security and their structure. Certainly, you can hand that over to the government if the government says they do want to see your system security plan. That would be in the form of DCMA's DIBCAC team when they perform an audit. And the government certainly, as of 7020, has the right to come in and audit you at any time. Everything on the right, they will also ask you, are you certified yet? If you're not certified, do you have a date? If you don't have a date, where are you self-attesting to for CMMC level 2 currently? And the last question, which meets everything, is have you posted a score to SPRS? And that's really twofold. Have you posted a score for the DFARS 7012 and that NIST 800-171 tab I showed you? Have you posted a score in the CMMC level 2 self-attest tab? And I recommend you do both.
Very good.
Do you have any sense, maybe Alex too, do you have any sense for the impact on the defense community? Again, being on site yesterday, the comment was made that there were less than 400 companies, defense suppliers, contractors, that have reached the CMMC compliance level of the thousands. I don't know whether that was an accurate statement or not, but maybe you could provide some perspective on it.
Yeah, and this is certainly, and Alex, you and I have had, I think, many discussions on this.
Many.
What are the primes going to do? And I think that is a really good question for a lot of the primes. When you, and I've even heard this question in reverse. So this is an interesting one. I talked to the client the other day and they said, we're compliant, we're getting certified this year, but our prime wants to bid this and they haven't even implemented yet. And I said, I looked them straight in the eye and I said, well, either you can't bid this or you need to step up and be the prime. So I'm even hearing this on both sides, that the subcontractors and the supply chain aren't ready. Sometimes the primes haven't gotten ready. So as we move forward, the defense industrial base at large needs to have an implementation strategy. And that implementation strategy, when I talk to a lot of my clients, I tell them you have to think through how you are going to do this. If your subcontractor steps up and says, I'm not compliant, but they are still a critical vendor to you, what do you do? So some of the strategies that we've employed are sharing is caring, right? So a lot of the primes are walking into this face first, knowing they have to build an environment they can share. Now, here's the important, from the cyber perspective of how I have to get my client certified. You cannot say we built everything in GCC High or AWS GovCloud, and we're just going to let them in with their own domain name and their own email address. No, it doesn't work that way, because there's one particular control in the access controls that say, if you are interconnecting your systems with other systems outside of your secure and certified environment, you're basically violating the certification of that environment, right? So what you have to do if you're a prime, you have to make them an internal user. So you can go into Microsoft AWS and you're saying, okay, we're going to give you an internal user account, and you treat them as if they're an employee. You're going to abide by our training mandates because now you're in our infrastructure. There's another strategy we employ, which we add on a second enclave. Usually it's a file sharing SaaS type of software. Some of our favorites we've used, we use Prevail a lot for this. We've had other clients use Box. And what I like about this product is, number one, it's cheap, it's easy to deploy, and it's effectively an external but compliant solution. We use Prevail a lot because it's already FedRAMP moderate equivalent, but it also has both a drive, just kind of like Dropbox or Box does, and it has an email component to it as well. So what you do is you can effectively give them a small license, lock them down in that environment, and as long as they don't have, for example, CAD systems or design servers, they can probably work very effectively within that. As soon as you've got CAD servers in scope, you probably need to give them an internal license for internal systems. What some of my primes have been doing, though, is saying, okay, fork it up. We're not going to pay for your license out of pocket. You didn't have to go down the same very expensive, certification path we did, but you at least have to pay for the utilization of our licenses, our management of this environment. And most subcontractors were happy to do so.
So that's a great segue. Alex, maybe you can speak a minute on the solutions that Infor provides to help companies in the defense sector meet the compliancy and the audit process that Infor solutions have to go through to ensure they are meeting those compliancy requirements.
Yeah, just to finish up the last question there. So Forbes published an article that was sourced that said there's about 300,000 companies total in the defense industrial base, some of those being exceptionally small with a service contract of some type that's not going to apply in this particular case. But of those, about 80,000 companies are expected to require level 2 certification. As of late August, only 270 had got there. So it's certainly going to create a bottleneck. Wow. So, a lot of companies, because, don't forget, the CMMC program as a program has been around since its inception as an idea of over 7 years. And then it was published, 18 months ago or so as a program, but there was no teeth, to Christina's point. What really changed, and the piece that everybody is sort of now waking up to, is that on September 10th, the government finally published the DFARS clause, making this mandatory through the publication in contracts, as Christina just went through for us. With a 60-day implementation period, it becomes effective on November 10th of 2025. So now it's going to start showing up in contracts. So you've got, as she mentioned, you got a year there to do the self-certification, right? But short of that, like the point was just made, you don't really have a year. If the requirement's there, you're either certified or you're not in order to win. That's really speaking self-certification for level 2. Level 2 in the second year requires that outside audit, and then year 3 for the level 3 certification process. So folks don't have that, and that's the size and scope of the problem and a bottleneck. So a lot of people, because it was around for 7 years, were waiting for the government to do something. It was always a rumor that there's something coming, there's going to be a rule change, and it finally happened. And so now a lot of companies are, oh man, I got to get this done. So Infor, PCG, BDO, collectively as a community, we've been preparing for this. So Infor has several product offerings in the space, both for ERP as well as edge products that service both the SMB, mid-market, and enterprise level companies. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. You're not going to sell an enterprise solution to a small business that needs to meet this from a supply chain perspective. So we do have both upper and down market offerings to make sure that everybody in the community can be served appropriately. And obviously having partners like PCG and BDO to advise and to implement from both a consulting and implementation standpoint. So collectively as an ecosystem, we're prepared to support businesses of all size. And as Christina, I think we'll get into, there's a split, just like anything else you do. A lot of the consulting firms sold off their consulting, the big four, big five audit companies, right? They sold off their consulting practices because they can't do the audit work of their consulting. And then, Christina, as a leader in the community for doing the consulting to make sure folks are prepared for CMMC as it's coming. And then there'll be other firms who will do the attestation and the reviews for certification. So between PCG and BDO and Infor collectively here, we're well suited to serve the community.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Since we're kind of starting to talk about the ERP system, let's go into a little bit about, from my perspective, how the environment has to be built and some of the problems we've seen. So I kind of want to pick up on what are some of the issues. And everybody on this call, we have certainly, I think we've talked till we're blue in the face about how strategic architecture is being constructed by every major defense industrial base that are seeking their certification. And more, some of the issues that we're seeing from the consulting side of getting them to certification, I've tried to address them on this list. So first and foremost, we see fewer and fewer companies going what I call all in, which means they took, and very early on, many companies took the assumption that when the DoD told them to secure CUI, because they were very not specific about it, that they just assumed this means our whole infrastructure. When I came into this, and I came from a classified systems background doing information assurance, I was an information assurance security officer for the Army, building these packages for classified systems. The one thing the DoD does not do is assume that every system in their infrastructure touches classified information. So when I came into this, I didn't come in with that assumption. And I built a team that they all came from the DoD. So they don't take that assumption either. So when I started first in 2020 for BDO, people would come to me and say, I'm having a really hard time locking down my entire network to 110 controls. And I just looked at them blankly and said, why are you doing that? I said, you need to analyze what systems are actually touching CUI, and let's just segregate them. We can make a secondary enclave so that we can determine what CUI is being stored upon, processed in, and transmitted from and to, and then just make that deployment very strategic. And so one of the ways I talk to clients about this, I've got a nice little depiction here, is, segregate out your assets. Anything that is not in the CUI, we assume touches at minimum FCI. And this is largely because ERP systems and business systems are going to be in that scope. So as a lot of my clients are trying to determine, if we look at our enterprise and we try to secure everything in there, will it pass? The DoD has some very high standards on which systems will pass. We know there's a lot of legacy systems in there. The more we're adding cloud service offerings into scope, the DoD has set a very high bar for this and said, if those cloud service offerings are going to touch CUI, they need to be at a certain standard. So they have to be FedRAMP moderate, either equivalent, which actually is a higher standard than a full-blown FedRAMP ATO, because the DoD further set the bar on getting FedRAMP moderate equivalent. The company offering the service offering will have to go get certified by a FedRAMP 3 PAO, and they have to be 100%. They cannot have a POAM item open in order to meet this FedRAMP moderate equivalency. Well, it turns out when we work with a lot of our clients and we start to look across everything that touches in their enterprise, and we look at, I have a nice little scoping diagram. When we look at the scoping, there are 4 asset categories for systems that either directly touch CUI, the far thing on the left is a CUI asset, or all the things that touch the systems that touch CUI. And some of those may be contractor risk managed assets. And we see more and more when we work with business systems, a lot of those effectively are contractor risk managed assets up and until the point that they are storing CUI, and very often what I'm seeing, especially with manufacturers, they're storing ITAR in the form of bill of materials in these systems. So as we've worked along with Infor and making sure that we have an understanding of, you've built a very effective government cloud compliant, fully ATO'd version, but how do we realistically deploy this when we have a lot of issues with a company that goes all in? And we know, first and foremost, that's one of the problems. The second problem we've seen a lot of is that the personnel that are allowed to access these systems, even BDO, we have a RISE team in India that does a lot of our invoicing. If we were storing ITAR in those systems, we could potentially be racking up fines, right? So for my clients, this is the point at which I may advise them to have a different strategy and a different approach. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Alex, to see, because we've been talking about this a lot, how Infor is doing this. And then I'll kind of hop back to what we're doing from the architecture perspective to support Infor on that.
Right. So I guess it's different in a couple scenarios, right? Because there are multinationals where you've got manufacturing in the United States and you've got manufacturing abroad. And some folks, scenarios we've run into, will have a blanket TAA waiver for ITAR, and they'll confuse that with CMMC as if they've got permission to get a waiver on the DoD side. They're 2 different regulatory bodies that are governed by 2 different executive institutions in the United States. So in addition to that, you have EAR governed by Commerce, ITAR governed by state in terms of who's got regulatory authority, and then CMMC is a DoD regulation coming out. So there's a bit of confusion there, just to clear that up for folks. So most multinationals will have to have a fully walled off U.S. subsidiary in the U.S., right? That's a completely separate legal entity. But then it becomes a question of their business. So whether you're a multinational or you're just a U.S. institution that's got multiple facilities, which is really where this would apply, right? Because if you've got multiple enclaves, it's rare that you'd have a single institution with 2 ERP systems in the same facility, right? That's a very rare scenario. But what we're seeing more often would be, hey, only 10% of my business is defense, or only 20% of my business is defense. Do I want to put the whole institution on the GovCloud? So in these particular cases, the offerings are available in a commercial cloud as well. So if you've got mixed business where you've got, say, commercial aviation, or you've got, an industrial product that's servicing multiple industries, including the defense industry, but that happens to be the bulk of your business, or at least a significant enough percentage that you need to retain that going forward, then that portion of the business is usually put into the enclave, as you mentioned, right? That meets the security standards, hosted in a GovCloud environment, meeting the correct environment. The rest of the business is then, you have a choice. If it's all U.S. persons, you can stick everybody inside of the GovCloud. But because the requirements mean that the servers, the backup servers, and the maintenance all has to be done in the United States by U.S. persons, nothing can be offshored. There's a cost premium that comes with that, and that's across the board, no matter what company you're dealing with. So companies are opting to put the non-defense commercial portion of the business, in some cases, in a commercial instance of the software. In the case, depending on which ERP offering from us that you're looking at, or edge product, you may have the ability to do multi-site functionality, in which case you can do intercompany transactions for those that are within that instance. But if you have separate instances, basically what you would do is you would have a financial consolidation that would take place outside. And if you needed to do business between the 2 entities, they wouldn't necessarily be integrated, right? You may treat as a subcontractor or an outside vendor relationship where you cut a purchase order and send it back and forth. It may be at $0, right? Those are the things you work through depending on the legal entity and how that works from a tax perspective. But there's ways to handle that. And so that's not lost on us. And that's actually something we're running into on a regular basis. That's a really great question.
Yeah. And to add some content from the RPO side, what I have found, and this is the reason why my practice in BDO, we stay on the consulting side, because our team with the years of expertise that we have, and almost everybody on my team has each 30 years experience working for the DoD, what we have learned is to ask questions that the clients probably haven't thought of. And one of the most frequent questions I ask when I first come into it, and I'm doing a scoping of where is CUI, what is it touching? One of the first questions I will ask is, do you have ITAR? One of the second questions I will ask is, what is your ERP system storing? And do you even know who has access to that? Because if it is an aerospace or a military manufacturer, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to find, ITAR on that system. And 9 times out of 10, I'm also seeing foreign nationals that are freely accessing the system. And 9 times out of 10, I will also see that many of their system administrators might be foreign nationals operating on foreign soil. And that creates huge problems. And I want to bring up the elephant in the room about ITAR is each individual fine is $1.2 million potentially for each violation. And that could be each individual file. We've seen some major cases of self-reporting, the contractors doing the right thing. But in one particular case, they had an employee that brought his laptop to Russia, and it had, controlled elements on it, both CUI, and it had ITAR on it. And he had a girlfriend. So not only was the data now on foreign soil, a foreign national was viewing the data. So there were over 750 violations in that case. And it started at a $1 billion fine. It did get whittled down. But those are my primary concerns when I walk in is, do we know who has access to probably the most expensive lesson you'll ever learn?
I think so. And when we talk about these implementations, right, these are, and you're requiring enterprise software and implementing it. Sometimes it's tossed on IT. Hey, this is an IT project. It's not. It's a business project, right? Because these are business processes that are being automated. If you look at what an enterprise system is, at the end of the day, it's the automation and digitization of processes that exist and did exist prior to computers, right? It was just done by hand. So the business, has to take a bigger, stake in the project from the beginning, and we sort of encourage that. But often what gets left to the sidelines is compliance, sometimes legal, right? And sometimes IT, will get pushed off to the side. In these particular instances, to Christina's point, is you're evaluating options and which tenancy you need to go into, whether it's a GovCloud or commercial or a combination of which product is appropriate. It's a combination of factors of reviewing the contracts and future business requirements for the DFAR clauses Christina just mentioned. But it's also your legal and compliance requirements, right? How is your company structured from a legal entity standpoint? Are they separate instances, separate legal entities? There's tax implications there. And then your compliance folks really need to be involved. So as folks are going into these cycles, the one thing I would ask you to keep in mind is to ensure that you're including IT, legal, and compliance in your selection process in addition to business folks, to make sure you're protecting yourself as a business so you don't end up subject to the fines that Christina was talking about, because the government does not play games with this.
First of all, thank you both so much for making time. This is a really critical issue facing the defense industrial base. The more information we can provide in a timely manner on this is super important. On behalf of BDO and Infor and PCG, I want to thank you very much for attending. Should you need more information about compliancy, ERP, or implementing solutions, please let us know, and we're happy to help. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. Another solution in our spotlight. We want to thank Dan, Alex, and Christina for that presentation, and we appreciate your attendance as well. Until next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.
If your business would like to be featured in a future event, contact us today.